அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி தானி பெரும் கருணை அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி 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 தானி பெரும் கருணை அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி 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 தானி பெரும் கருணை அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி.
அருட்பெருஞ்சோதி தனிப்பெரும் கருணை. My name is Thill Raghu, and you've already mentioned that I'm a professor of philosophy here in College of Southern Nevada. I mean, I spent many years in Canada, and although, during my, I think, teenage years, I was acquainted with the biography of Vallalar. I think it was S.P. Annamalai, if I'm correct, in Bharatiya Vidyabhavan publication, Life of Ramalingam, or Ramalinga, Saint Ramalinga, I think, and then Vanmiganathan, if I'm remembering the name correctly, Pathway to God, trod by Ramalinga Adigal. But I actually discovered the Arutparanjodi Agaval with Sarvananda's commentary in Tamil at McMaster University Library in Canada, when I was doing my master's there. In the 80s, and accidentally came across that. It seemed to be accidental, but I think it was all Vallalar's grace, and that's what really got me interested in Suddha Sanmarga. And from there off and on, I was interested in his writings, and then over the last few years now, the interest again, due to Vallalar's grace, has intensified. I've been maintaining a blog, Suddha Sanmargam, or a way of pure and truth theism, can also be called the true path of harmony. Suddha Sanmargam actually is a true path of harmony, and published some posts and articles and so forth, and eventually I want to put them all together and publish a book. And Mr. Prasanna Sivasubramaniam has also indicated some interest in possible publication introducing Suddha Sanmargam. So hopefully by Vallalar's grace it will all materialize. In any case, I'm very happy to join you all, and I'm very happy to know that this mission, I had not, before Mr. Sivasubramaniam, Prasanna Sivasubramaniam contacted me, I think several weeks ago, I was not even aware that there was this universal mission in the United States, and I think it's a great endeavor, and all credit goes to Mr. Prasanna Sivasubramaniam and all of you for organizing this and for continuing with this. I'm sorry that I could not join the earlier sessions, but hopefully I will be able to join the future sessions. In any case, appreciate all of your interest in the fact that you are joining this session. So the topic is the ethics of Suddha Sanmargam, or Suddha Sanmargam ethics. And as we know, that is the first and the most important step in Suddha Sanmargam, the ethics. And what is this ethics? You all know that it is Jiva Karunya Vurukam. So the Vurukam, actually, that word contains more connotations than the English word ethics. So now we have ethics, study of right and wrong, and we have ethic, which is a particular type of, morality. And that may also capture some element of Urukam. But Urukam is actually almost like a way of living. Not simply, moral aspects. It's actually a way of living. And in Suddha Sanmargam, of course, we have the fourfold workam, Indriya workam, which is divided into Kanmendriya workam and Jnanendriya workam, and then we have Karana workam, and then Jiva workam and Anma workam. And the Jiva Karanyam actually pertains to all of these. And so it is actually the foundation for all of the four workams that in Suddha Sanmargam we are supposed to steadfastly practice. And it is, it's a lifelong process. It can't be achieved, obviously, overnight or even in a few years. One has to keep practicing. Yeah, there will be failures, there will be mistakes, there will be regressions and so forth, but we have to pull ourselves up and keep the ideal in front of our consciousness and try to practice it more and more. So in any case, this Jivakaranya Workam is the first and the foremost step, as you all know, but it is actually the pathway to what Vallalar calls Suddha Sanmargatin Mukhya Laksham in the first Vinapam. And this Mukhya Laksham is, or ideal, is Anmane Urmaipada. But to understand Jivakaranyam and how it is actually an expression of Anmane Urmaipada and also leads to the full realization of Anmane Urmaipada, we have to understand, of course, the concept of Anma. And Vallalar's concept of Anma is not the Vedantic concept of Atman. The Vedantic concept of Atman is of the self with capital S. It is not subject to any suffering and so forth, and it's beyond time and space and, Satchidananda and so forth, existence, consciousness, bliss. That is not Vallalar's concept of Anma. The Vallalar's concept of Anma is, of course, delineated or outlined in the Jivakaranya Workam. Unfortunately, we only have the incomplete version of it. But it is very clearly explained by Vallalar. I mean, the one thing in Vallalar's writings is the clarity. Vallalar's intelligence is wonderfully and clearly expressed in his great Tamil prose. And in any case, with clarity, he has explained what Anma is. Anma is the principle of soul with the small s. Individual soul is the principle of intelligence and knowledge in the body. So we can examine the body and we can talk about the brain and the heart and all of these organs and their constituents. But as he says, it does not make any sense to attribute chit or intelligence to any of these parts, either taken by themselves or all together. So, for instance, you cannot say that the hand knows that there is pain. Hand has some reactions which you can measure in terms of electrical impulses and so forth when a needle is pressed. But the hand does not know that it is pain. So what is it in the body that recognizes that when the needle is pushed against the skin, that there is pain? Or when something sweet is put on the tongue, of course the tongue has its chemical reactions. But the tongue does not know that it is sweet or sour. So what is it in the body that knows that it is sweet or sour? And going beyond these sensations, what is it in the body that knows that it is happy or that it is unhappy? That is the soul. what is Anma. That is the principle of intelligence and knowledge in the body. Now, it is clear that Vallalar views, and I think he is absolutely, this is our common experience. So he's not really talking about anything from Mars or Moon or anything like that. This is all our common experience that we undergo. Sensations of pleasure and pain, we undergo experiences of joy and suffering, and we say, I am happy, I am unhappy, and there is also knowledge that we are happy or unhappy and so forth. This is all in the soul, because that is the principle of intelligence and knowledge in the body. So we have to start with that truth, that the individuals are souls, and of course you have Vallalar's classification of the 7 forms of life. And the 7 forms of life are, as he puts it in Jeevakarnya Urukam, Devar, Manidar, Naragar, Mirugam, Paravai, Urvana, Davaram. So we, of course, Deva and Naragar, as he himself says, are not accessible to humans. But at least we should feel, again, this is the greatness of Vallalar's ethics, at least we should feel that they will also undergo suffering and have compassion. But we are not in a position to do anything about the suffering of Devas and Naragars. So we focus on Manidar, other fellow human beings, and the animals that Vallalar divides into 3 forms. Mirugam, animals, which is actually Narapana, Paravai, birds, and Urvana, insects, reptiles. And again, testifying to the profound range of Vallalar's ethical sense, Davaram, plants, trees, and so forth. Variya Pairei Kandabodalam Vandinen, and so forth. Testifying again, he's not simply talking about it intellectually. He himself experienced all of these things. So all these 7 forms of life are basically souls, embodied, of course, in different forms. And then he says, actually, இவ்வேழு வகைப்பட்ட அளவிறந்த பேதங்களுடைய. So that means each of these 7 forms has innumerable variations. Obviously, we observe that, the diversity on Earth, innumerable forms of animals, innumerable forms of Paravai, and innumerable forms of Urvana, and innumerable forms of Davaram. And, he implies that there are innumerable forms of Deva and innumerable forms of Naragar also. But anyway, our concern is with the 5 forms of life that are accessible to us, the humans and the Mirugam, Paravai, Urvana, and Davaram. So all of them are souls. And this takes us to the point that they are all souls and they all have an essential nature. Although the body, whether it is plant or tree or animal or bird or insect or human, is different. But the principle of intelligence is the same. So this is actually a very profound point, and again, we can talk about it, but we also, I think, have to make an effort to completely understand it at the mental or intellectual level, but also take it deeper than that. That is to say, we have to have that sense. So there was this famous German humanitarian, Albert Schweitzer, who went to Africa. I think maybe he was Swiss. He went to Africa and he worked with the poor in Africa, and he wrote this book called Reverence for All Life, or that was the message, And that kind of reverence, even Gandhi also talked about that. That kind of reverence is what needs to be cultivated. It can come only when we begin to more and more feel. So it's not simply an idea that these 5 forms of life that are accessible to us all have the essential nature, despite the differences in their bodies and sense organs and so forth. So, plants, orarivu, and so on. And the other forms have different endowments. And of course, the human body, the human form of life it has the orarivu, and is eminently suited for realizing the ultimate goal, Aruparanjodi, grace and Arul and so forth. So it has a special position in Vallala's view, the human body. But all of these 5 forms of life have a fundamentally same nature, and there's a fundamental equality because of the fact that in all of them it is the same Anma with the same essential nature of intelligence, Arivu. So contemplating this, when we read the Vinnapams and, Agaval and so forth, but this should also be part of our practice. Which is actually there in Jiva Workam and Anma Workam. In fact, the Anma Workam, as you know, Vallalar says that Yane Mudal Yerumbu Varai தோன்றிய சரீரங்களில் உள்ள ஆன்மாவே திருசபையாகவும் அதன் உள் ஒளியே பரியாகவும் யாதும் நீக்கமரக் கண்டு எவ்விடத்தும் பேதமற்று எல்லாம் தானாக நிற்றல் ஆன்ம ஒழுக்கம். Of course, that is the ஆன்மநேய ஒருமைப்பாடு realization. But the preparation for it is to understand, and I think there is a solid scientific basis for this. All life is one family. That is established by the science of genetics. We share our genetic material in various degrees with all of life. So that truth that that all of these 5 forms of life are one family is confirmed by science. Pairbul karana parisigal parpala uirthiral ondrana uraithamai sivame, something to that effect, These bodily forms are different and their organs are different, but uirthiral is one. I mean, Vallalar said this, before, probably around 1872 or something like that, which I suspect is the time when he composed Aruparanjodi Agaval to express his enlightenment. And by the way, I want to add, so 1872, he has already realized the truth that the science of genetics confirmed in the 20th century after various, studies and so forth. So this is a very, very profound fact. But by the way, I want to add here that, Vallalar's Siddhi, sometimes, I think some email, I think your friend, Mr. Prasanna Karthikeyan had mentioned, Karthik, Vallalar Siddhi Petronal. But January 30th, 1874 is not the Siddhi Petronal. Vallalar Siddhi already is in somewhere around 1872 or earlier than that. I mean, his progressive, the Siddhi was progressive, and it goes back, as he says in the Vinnapams, to his youth and even childhood. When he was early youth, when he was, upstairs room in Chennai, had visions of Murugan, some versions of his biography say in the mirror that he had requested from his brother, who said, well, we can't feed you, if you don't go study. And, that's also an interesting point, a very important point, undergoing the suffering of hunger there. The brother, I don't know, seems to be an unacceptable form of cruelty, especially to such a great child like Vallalar. Was a model child in many ways. Anyway, that punishment of withholding food, which of course Vallalar's sister-in-law overcame and used to feed him, without knowledge of her husband. But in any case, when he asked for that, mirror and lamp and so forth upstairs, realization already started then. And Vallalar makes it very clear in the Vinnapams that his spiritual progress was unfolding from then, and I think it reached its full consummation before he wrote the Agaval. And as they say, he wrote it in one night, and if you look at the manuscript, there's hardly any error. There's one or two places you can see that he has put a letter or something above a letter that may have not been written legibly, but there's really no correction, and this is extraordinary. Even Sri Aurobindo, the great composer of Savitri, which is also a very, great spiritual epic, worked on it and made revision after revision right towards the end of his life, 1950. Several drafts and versions were made by Sri Aurobindo. But Vallalar never made any revisions. It all came pouring down. And simply as a feat of poetry itself, it's quite an unparalleled achievement. I can't think of any other case like that. But in any case, so, when we speak about Vallalar's Siddhi and all that, we have to understand that it's something that was progressing right from his early youth and culminated before he wrote the Arupperanjodi Agaval. Already attained the Siddhi. So January 30th is a different matter. Siddhi was already there. Of course, to indicate it, I think he raised the flag of Suddha Sanmargam, which again is a spiritual symbolism with the yellow and white. But that's just a symbolic act. His realization already goes back, as I've said a few times, before he composed Arupperanjodi Agaval. And Arupperanjodi Agaval testifies to Vallalar's attainment of Siddhi. In any case, back to this Jivakarinyam, it's the first and the foremost step. It is based on this realization of the presence of the soul as the principle of intelligence and knowledge in all the five forms of life and all their variations. It is the common principle. And that takes us to the realization of soul kinship. SOUL hyphenated kinship. So we're speaking about one family, as it were. And that's difficult to realize. It has to be achieved progressively. And we have to, of course, pray for Arupperanjodi, Vallalar's grace. There's no difference actually between Vallalar's consciousness and Arupperanjodi. So we can actually even say Vallalar hyphenated Arupperanjodi or Arupperanjodi hyphenated Vallalar. So you have to pray for grace to realize this, because when you step out into the world, we see the diversity, and we see all kinds of oppositions. But that's also, Vallalar covers it, and maybe this can be a topic for some other discussion. Pagayinil, Uravinil, Pagay, and so forth. This is all part of Arupperanjodi's Arul. But we get confused by the oppositions and by the differences. If you look at a crow, Paravai is completely different from a human being. But if you examine very carefully, again, this is where Vallalar's approach includes science, but it goes beyond science as we know it today, but it includes science. a lot of similarities are there, even at the physiological level. And in terms of response, because the same intelligence is there in all life. So that's why we find a lot of common features, and the focus has to be on these common features, and we shouldn't get confused by the differences. So if you take the human family, of course there seem to be some differences in terms of what is so-called race. So you have different complexions of skin and all that stuff, but we know that all human beings evolved from Africa. Now, evolution, again, is something that is affirmed by Vallalar. The key word in Arupparinjodi Agaval, hello, can everyone hear me? I hope I've not lost the connection. Hello?
Yes, sir, we could hear you. We are back.
Okay. Because sometimes this phone, it's a voice over internet, and, hopefully it's by Vallalar's grace it continues. But, for instance, one of the key words in Agaval is Teruttal. Arulinit Teruttum Arupparinjodi. Teruttal actually is development. Okay, so like for instance, you are developing something. Maybe you start a project and you develop it. You make additions and subtractions and you improve it. That is Teruttal. That's evolution. But there's one difference, of course, between Teruttal and evolution. In the Darwinian conception of evolution, it's a random events happen. There are some mutations and they just say it happened accidentally and so forth. That is not part of the concept of Teruttal. Teruttal is development. That means there is a pattern, there is a goal to be achieved, and all the changes the changes go through stages. And each successive stage is higher than the previous stage, and it reaches the goal. That is the action of Arupparinjodi, to bring about development. And so what is called evolution is actually Arupparinjodi's act of Teruttal. And, of course, we, with our little minds, we can only comprehend a little bit of this and a little bit of that here and there. But evolutionary science, definitely, again, is something we have to study. In addition to physics, cosmology, as Vallalar made it very clear in his last discourse, Perupadesam, which I have pointed out to Mr. Sivasubramaniam, seems to contain some elements that I don't think Vallalar would have said. There's some very obscure or very confusing statements about Tolkappiyam and all that, and there are some confusing statements about Thirai in the Perupadesam, which could not have come from Vallalar, but I think it does record some statements of Vallalar quite accurately, because they are consistent with, these statements are consistent with the Vinnapams and Arupparinjodi Agaval. But in Perupadesam, he makes very clear that in Suddha Sanmargam we have to inquire into, as he puts it, under Vicharam, cosmology, where do these stars come from, planets and galaxies and so forth, science of cosmology, and Pinda Vicharam, which is biology. So, as practitioners of Suddha Sanmargam, we have to examine science of cosmology and science of biology. And we will find, when we look at the science of biology, we will discover the truth of soul kinship. The fact that all of these forms of life are one family. Biologically, of course, they are looking at it simply in terms of biological or genetic aspect, but we are, of course, looking at the inner aspect, the spiritual aspect, which, of course, is manifested in the biological realm. I mean, the spiritual truth does not exist in some vacuum or somewhere up in the clouds. It is expressed here, and it is expressed in biology. And that's why biology, genetics have said all life is one family. And we're looking at it from the spiritual aspect in terms of Vallalar's teachings. And the spiritual aspect is this, that the biological truth of kinship, unity of all life, is simply a reflection of the spiritual truth that it is the same principle of intelligence, knowledge, Anma, that is present in all of these bodies. So anyway, back to the cultivation of this, contemplation, meditation, whatever you want to call it, of this truth of soul kinship. And I was saying, when we step out, we get confused by the diversity. And one way is to simply deny the diversity and say it's all Maya and so forth. And of course, Maya used in the Vedantic sense, not in the Saiva Siddhanta sense of primal matter. As you know, in Saiva Siddhanta, which Vallalar was profoundly familiar with, although he went beyond it, Maya is matter, primordial matter, from which the universe developed by the grace of Arupparanjodi. But in the Vedantic sense, the illusion and all that kind of stuff, or dream and all that, they want to deny this diversity. But in Suddha Sanmargam, we don't deny this diversity. Vallalar accepts the diversity. That is why he praises Arupparanjodi's, incomprehensible grace in creating so many forms. Ceaselessly bringing about these 7 forms of life with all the variations. We accept this diversity. It is a reality. It is the product of Arupparanjodi's grace, the workings of grace, Arun, which again is a very profound concept in Vallalar. Again goes beyond Saiva Siddhanta. Although it contains some elements of it. And of course, as you know, Manika Vasagar also used the concept, but Vallalar, I think, extended it. In any case, yes, we accept this diversity. We don't just try to escape from it and say, it's all illusion and there is only one Brahman and so forth. We accept it, but we also see the unity in the diversity. That's what will prevent our minds from getting confused and then getting caught up in attraction and repulsion, which, of course, as you know, in Karana Workam, Raga, we have to go beyond attraction and repulsion and achieve sattva, or harmony. So we don't get confused. We realize that there is one soul principle. It's manifested in all of these different forms of life. And what is the attitude then that we have to take on this basis? Well, that is where compassion comes in. Since that soul principle is there in the body, not, Atman beyond space and time and has no experience of body and all that kind of stuff, Vallalar simply rejects all that Vedantic stuff in a few sentences in the Jivakarnya Workam. What is it that suffers in the body? What is it that enjoys in the body? That is Anma. So it's not beyond space and time and all that kind of stuff. It is here in the body. And since we know that this Anma principle undergoes pain and pleasure and joy and suffering and so forth in various forms based on the body, structure of the body, we practice compassion. We start with, we can say, the negative principle of compassion, which is do not inflict harm or suffering. You have to take extreme care not to inflict any harm or suffering on living beings. So there's no need to destroy, crush plants and so forth. It's not necessary to do so. We try to do this to the extent we can. Sometimes people will set up this kind of false opposition. Either you have to do it perfectly or you don't have to do it at all. No. Those are not the only 2 options. The various other mediums or means in between. I try to do as much as I can, and I try to develop my consciousness so that I avoid unnecessary destruction or harm or suffering to other living beings, including other human beings. So there. Just because I can't do it perfectly doesn't mean I have to completely neglect it. I try to practice it to the extent that I can, based on my knowledge and capacity, which Vallalar says in Jivakarnya Workam. We know that another Jivan is about to undergo suffering or is suffering, and we have the means either to prevent it or to reduce it or to remove it. We do it. Sometimes we may know, but we may not have the means, which, well, I think it's kind of unlikely, but maybe there are cases like that. In that case, at least we think about that Jivan suffering, and we pray to Aruparanjodi that Jivan suffering may be removed. But to the extent that we can, we do whatever we can, And then, of course, if we don't know, then we can't do anything about it. And that's also an important point. We have to try and acquire knowledge of the sufferings of beings. So this means becoming aware of what is going on in the world, which is the reason why Tolvur Velayada Madaliyar says that Vallalar always had a sad expression in his face. That's not a personal, there's nothing personal there. He's not about anything to do with his life. He already achieved the greatest goal of realizing Aruparanjodi and Aruparanjodi's grace, by Aruparanjodi's grace. It's not personal, but the sorrow is about the suffering of Jivargal in the world. That's what the sadness in his face is all about. It doesn't mean we also have to walk around with that kind of sad expression and imitate that, but at least we try to become aware of what is going on. So we try to understand what's going on in any society that we are living in. The United States, millions of people are living in poverty. There's all kinds of gun violence going on and so forth. And the United States, the government is creating immense suffering in other countries by bombings and so forth, Middle East, Syria, Iraq. And hopefully we're not going to come to some catastrophic conflict in North Korea. Millions of people, imagine somebody like the President of the United States saying irresponsibly he's going to destroy North Korea. What do you mean? Almost 25 million people there. You're going to kill all of them, burn all of them to death with nuclear bombs? Learned anything from Hiroshima and Nagasaki? See, so becoming aware of all of these things. So these would be the social political aspects of Suddha Sanmarga, which again are rooted in the ethics. So we have to expand our knowledge of the sufferings that the Jivargal are undergoing, including plants and animals, Mr. Subramaniam mentioned a Sanmargam advocate, Sanmargam practitioner in Salem. I don't remember his name. What is his name? Mr. Subramaniam, you mentioned somebody who speaks. Yeah, probably that person. I've seen someone on YouTube, I can't recollect the name, but he also mentions this book that is called The Sixth Extinction. So the sixth extinction really documents the extinction of species as a result of human destruction of the environment. So all these precious forms out of human ignorance are being almost obliterated or on the verge of extinction. All these things we have to become aware of, and this is again part of the greatness of Vallalar's path. Let us remember this path was disclosed to Vallalar by Aruparanjodi. Obviously, it has to be something that has elements of greatness in it, which is, they may be present in some basic form in some other paths, but it all comes together in a great unity in Suddha Sanmargam. So we expand our awareness, our knowledge of all the sufferings that Jivargal are undergoing, these 5 forms. So that means we become aware of the environmental destruction, Amazon rainforest and so forth. Orarivul Jivargal, plants and trees, and that has an effect. This is the law of karma, right? And that is also affirmed by Vallalar and Jivakarnya Workam. So I said we should start with the negative principle: do not inflict harm, suffering, or try to the best of our knowledge and ability, not inflict harm or suffering on other living beings. And what will happen if you do? Well, that is given by the law of karma. You will undergo suffering in this life or at some point in accordance with Vallara says Arul Niyadi, you know. And the other thing is the positive principle. Not only do we just simply say, well, I'm not going to harm or I'm not going to inflict any suffering, but we actually try to, when we get to know that there is going to be suffering or there is suffering, to the best of our ability. Of course, we can only do what is within the means that we have. We try to alleviate, contribute to the alleviation. So, there are children in Syria that are, starving, and there is an international organization that is helping them. We contribute. And this is where I think this Vallara Universal Mission is such a wonderful idea. And I hope Mr. Sivasubramaniam and all of you, will expand its scope slowly to implement all of these things that are part of Vallala's ethics. So again, Jiva Karmyam then is negative principle: do not inflict harm or suffering to the best of your knowledge and ability. And then either prevent or alleviate, treat, reduce suffering when you see it to the best of your ability. So I think that basically sums up, Jiva Karmya Welcome, with one emphasis that, of course, there are different kinds of sufferings. So we are not in a position to address all of them. That's why Vallara has said, Pasi and Kolai, these are the two great sufferings that all Anmas undergo. Starvation and getting killed, murdered, and we have to try and do, as he says, by whatever means that we have to stop or to alleviate these things. It can take various forms. I mean, you say, you join a protest against U.S. bombings in some other country, and that's also some contribution you're making. Or maybe you're writing about it, informing people that this is what's going on. The bodies that Vallara says are like little houses created or brought about by Arupparanjodi, they are being blasted, by these bombings and so forth. And certainly we have to protest if we have any kind of Anmane or Mipad, they are not destroyed, but they are undergoing that horrible suffering, which, as Vallara says, even in when he was 31 in Manumurai Kanda Vasagam, that's common to humans and other forms of life. The suffering of death, especially by murder, when the Anma is forcibly expelled from the body, and it comes out of the body, as Vallara describes quite vividly in a section of Manumurai Kanda Vasagam, it comes out of the body confused and puzzled as to what has happened. That is a very terrible form of suffering. And then it has to be born again, which is another form of suffering. So that's why murder, kolai, is so bad. And it is one of the worst crimes in Suddha Sanmarga ethics. Because you're forcibly expelling the soul and subjecting it to the suffering of dying and the suffering of subsequent birth. And then, of course, Pasi, as you all know, Vallara says there is no suffering like that. In fact, he says that Marana Vedanai and, the Vedanai of Pirapu are all experienced in Pasi. So that should be the main focus. And again, I hope with Vallara's grace, Vallara's universal mission can do more in organizing efforts, and I will try to contribute, my time, whatever I can, to the best of my ability when I'm informed about these activities to do what it can to, I guess we can start with Tamil Nadu and do something about, hunger, problem of hunger, Now there's a problem now with, again, global warming and everything else. Many rivers are drying up in Tamil Nadu. And I remember I was in Tamil Nadu in August 2017, and I was fortunate to have the Jyoti Darshanam in Vadalur. But I was also in Trichy and so forth, and Madurai, and the Kaveri is, completely, there's some areas, parts in Trichy where there's really nothing there. And Dindigul also, I think there's, people have pointed out, things are all drying up, riverbeds are drying up, so there's a water problem which is going to create, of course, the problem of thirst, which is part of this problem of Pasi and Dagam, And if a universal mission can extend its scope and join with other organizations and so forth to deal with this problem of hunger, thirst, that I think will be wonderful. And I'm sure it will have Vallala's complete blessings. So back to, again, this Jivakaranyam, I think I've captured some aspects of it, but where is it going? So we are developing compassion by studying science, by studying what is going on in the world, and of course it all includes study of some solutions also. We can't simply say, yes, there are Jivargal who are suffering from hunger and not try to find out correct solutions. And then if we pray to Arupar and Jyoti, the correct solutions will come. They will come because of the motivation. Motivation is compassion. So as Vallalar says, that's like lighting the big fire, of Arul, the small flame of compassion. That's why he says that's the only thing that's essential. Jivakaranyam is the only essential thing to receive the Arul that will bring about all of these other, realizations and transformations. The Jivakaranyam, again, you develop it, and at some point it will become full-fledged realization of Anmaneya Urmaippadu. So that's the goal, as Vallalar has indicated in Vinnappam. The Mukhya Laksham is Anmaneya Urmaippadu, which is explained, of course, as I read those sentences from the description of Anma Vurukam. And as you know, that Vallalar actually had all of this printed on paper and posted actually in the Satya Dharmasala. The Jiva Workam, Karana Workam, Karana Workam, Indriya Workam, Karana Workam, Jiva Workam, and Anma Workam. So the Jiva Workam and Anma Workam, both of them express this ideal of Anmaneya Urmaippadu. And that's what we are trying to realize when we practice Jivakaranya Workam. Now, there are some questions, some objections can be made. I'm sure you have some questions, but I think I was discussing with Mr. Sivasubramaniam on the phone at one point. People will say, for instance, how do you deal with, let's say, wild animals? Lion or tiger or something, or karadi or whatever is going to attack you. How do you practice Jivakaranya Workam? Well, Vallalar was aware of all of this. As you know, the incomplete Jivakaranya Workam is in Q&A format. And he points out that it is permissible to create fear. The suffering of fear. Fear also is a form of suffering. And we should not needlessly inflict it on any other living being, including human beings. We should not create fear and terror in the minds of other humans, particularly the good people. As Vallalar says in Manumurai Kandavasagam, he prohibits creating fear and terror in the minds of good people. But in any case, in Jivakaranya Workam, he says that you can create fear in the minds of wild animals. So that means, maybe you have a gun or something, and you can point it to the sky, and you can, fire, if that's one way to scare it. And maybe other ways to scare it. Maybe you shoot, if necessary, near that animal, not at it, but near it to frighten it away. Various means, I'm just giving that as an example. So it's and the same thing with other human beings too. I mean, if they're coming to harm you, you can try ways to, you have to take recourse to creating fear in order to prevent them from creating any of these severe harms or sufferings on others. So it does allow, Jivakarunyam does allow for the use of force to create fear. And in some extreme cases, you can use, I think, unavoidable. Of course, that's the key word, underlined many times. If it's unavoidable, then you can even cause some, injury that's not life-threatening. So the basic thing you want to avoid is, of course, kolai. But in unavoidable cases, you may have to even cause some kind of non-fatal, non-life-threatening injury in order to protect someone from being killed or tortured and so forth. So all that is allowed for by Jivakarunyam. And of course the question of insects and all that, I was mentioning again to Mr. Sivasubramaniam the great Tamil movie, Ratta Kannir, with M.R. Radha. At one point, one scene I can remember, I haven't seen it now in quite a while. I think I saw it on YouTube a few years ago. It's a great movie, by the way, all this pretension of a foreign returned, and then he mistreats everybody, and then he suffers karma, you see. Goes to prostitutes and all that, and then he suffers the results. But at one point, he's outside somebody's house, and there's some conversation, and the owner of the house, the resident, mentions Jivakarunyam, and then M.R. Radha sarcastically asks, so what do you do with the insects? You're practicing Jivakarunyam? Well, that's a question. So what do you do with the insects? Well, I was mentioning to Mr. Sivasubramaniam, we can use insect repellent. And where possible, we can remove the insects outside the abode. The ways of trapping the insects without killing them, and then you remove them. You take it outside and leave them. I do that often with cockroaches. Thankfully, not many, or very few. Occasionally, especially in the summertime, I'll see. And then I just put a small cloth over them, and I take them outside, and they go away. And strangely enough, they've stopped coming. Occasionally one or two, of course, come through the bathroom sink or something like that, under the, in the pipes. In any case, so you can act in that way. It's not you don't have to immediately crush them, which is the common response. You just see something and immediately crush it. Can we create something like that? Even a mosquito, can we create? No, we can't. Even a mosquito, again, this is proof of Vallala's point, that is that the principle of intelligence, arivu, anma, even in a mosquito, even in an insect, you see even an ant, how wonderfully it navigates. And nobody knows. Even science has not been able to figure out how the ant, doesn't really have any brain, to speak of. How is it able to navigate and get around? One of the profound marvels, So that type of marvel created by Arupparanjodi, of course, through evolution, we can't just simply crush it like that, that is not Jivakarunya work. But we try to do what we can, remove it, and then we can use repellents, as I was mentioning to Mr. Sivasubramaniam. You can use repellents, mosquito repellent, insect repellent, which will keep them away. See, so when they sense it, they won't come there. So that you're not killing them, you're warding them off. Remember that the insects actually now, all these environmental studies are showing insect population is decreasing, and that's going to pose a severe danger to crops and so forth. Ecosystem, insects play a very important role. That's why all these 5 forms of life are one family. So you can't simply say that's only an insect and so forth, As I said, can we create one? We can't. We don't even understand how an ant navigates, gets around. So that doesn't mean we have to allow all these Kosukal to come and feed on our bodies and suck blood. We can use repellents and we can drive them away, and we can take various precautions. I mean, there's plenty of technology available to prevent them. Mosquito mesh, prevention mesh, and nets and all that, so you don't have to deal with them. So Jivakaryanam doesn't mean, as M.R. Radha seems to have misunderstood, that you allow Kosu and all of them to come and feed on your body or to get inside your body, No, you keep them away, And there we have the means to do that. Instead of simply, destroying them mindlessly, So this message of Jivakaranyam, I think, is the most urgent message today, because of the destruction that's going on. And that, I think, is what I wanted to talk about. I mean, so essentially the point is the ethics really is based on his concept of soul and soul kinship in all these 5 forms of life that we have access to. As I said, we don't have access to Naragar and Devar, but as he says, we can actually think, in our contemplation, they will also suffer, and that their sufferings should be taken care of. So the compassion towards these 5 forms of life by practicing the positive principle of helping, and then negative principle of avoiding, inflicting suffering, and then using that to slowly attain Anmane Urmi Part realization, which is soul kinship. And I think that is sufficient to work in one life or maybe several lifetimes. So I'd like to conclude with that point. And I know that I've only scratched the surface, but can't do more in a limited session like this. Thank you.
Thank you.